You know, people have said again and again, Democrats need to work on messaging. And when you have a message, you have content and you have to say it good, right? And there's two parts. And I'm also a little, of course, right? But we also have to say it in a way that people understand it, right? So when I say you have to say it good, you all knew what that meant and got the joke, right? I'm disappointed with the way that people have spoken to each other in our community over the last couple of years. The rhetoric used around unhoused people, poor people, elderly people, disabled people, and Black leaders on our city commission has been totally unacceptable. And what do we hear out of Trump and Musk? Nothing but abusive, coercive, controlling, domineering type of language, right? That is patriarchy in those communications. That's what that is. And there's a different way to talk to people. We can be supportive. There are ways to have disagreements with people and still use empowering and supportive language. And that is why a really great Democrat and licensed therapist here in town, Barbara Gilbert, has agreed to come and share some of this with us today.
Well, we're getting that going. I want to mention that part of how I ended up doing this is me thinking, what in the world do I have to offer to this whole situation? How can I participate? How can I bring, my particular mindset or skills or knowledge or wisdom? And I want all of you to think about that for yourselves too. We've all got something. Oh, even more. Okay, I thought I didn't even need the microphone, and Melinda said, yes, you do. So be thinking as we're talking about this, what do you have to offer to this whole effort? Because we're going to need all of you, and we're going to need everything you've got to bring to it. So this is my email address. If you want to follow up with any questions or have other thoughts you want to share, definitely use that, but Terry's going to handle the materials. Okay, let's see if this all works. So we have to start when we're talking about empowerment with what is power? There's a lot of different ways of thinking about power, and that's going to change how you follow up and what you do about it. So if you look in the dictionary, the most common first definition is the ability to produce an effect. So I would add that true power is the ability to serve effectively what matters most to us. That would be the most empowerment. And there are two major paradigms, really different ways of thinking about power. One of them is the dominance paradigm, which I'll explain some, and I think is the reigning paradigm. Probably of all human history, we have to work to come back out of that. But there's also a true power paradigm, which gives us a completely different pathway for empowerment that I'll spend even more time on. The dominance paradigm presumes that control and manipulation of others is the primary path. We see it writ large in our country right now. Trying to control other people is the main way that we see, whether we're on Facebook watching each other's discussion, people are trying to control and manipulate everybody else to change their opinion, or even at the national level, as we've talked about. The true power paradigm, which I'm going to be promoting today, it starts with an awareness of self and what matters most to us. And therefore, it requires self-awareness, self-expression, self-advocacy, and I'm going to argue that this is really the only truly effective pathway to serve what matters most to us. So I'm going to, not do justice. I had mentioned to Melinda, I have probably 20 hours of material to present, but I can't do that here. So you're going to see me skip a bit. And this is a nice summary, I think, of the big differences between the dominance paradigm and the true power paradigm. The dominance paradigm, you have to dehumanize people. You have to make them other. You have to call them names. You have to diminish them. We see that strategy used in war. If you call the enemy something less than human, it's easier to kill them. We see it again, on Facebook or social media. People will call each other names or imply that they're somehow lesser and not really human. We don't have to pay attention to their actual human existence and feelings. Dominance paradigm is also very other focused. It sees other people as the problem, and therefore we have to focus on the other person and make them be different for our lives to get better. That's really indirect, and it almost never works. And if it does work, it's only temporary. It only works temporarily. It's very blaming, you know, if other people are the bad people, other people are the ones that are the problem. If they don't fix what they're doing, we're all going to hell in a handbasket or whatever. Those are presumptions that are inherent. People don't even have to say them, but you can feel them in the communications. What we want to have is the antithesis to that. We want to be personally respectful. It's a rehumanizing element. And I'll talk about how respecting others empowers us if we get enough of the time. But trust me, it does. We get empowered when we respect others, but we absolutely get empowered when we respect ourselves. The other antithetical component of the true power paradigm is that it is self-focused and personally accountable. So that personal piece, you'll notice coming throughout here, when we make it person to person, even with these larger actions that we're doing, when we remember the personhood of others, we will become more empowered, and I'll try to illustrate how that's true. And then instead of blaming, it's about becoming personally responsible. And in this model, responsible means simply the ability to respond effectively. That's it. We don't have to have blame and shame, and we don't have to make people suffer for responsibility. It doesn't have to be this heavy burden. It's responsibility, which is actually not burdensome. It's energizing and motivating. Okay, so those are some of the main concepts. This is just a visual if you happen to be somebody who thinks that way. So respect, accountability, and responsibility are the three big things, big practices or attitudes. They're kind of both. They're the big components of true power. So we're not going to be able to dig in deep on all three of these today, but we're going to do our best to at least give you a sense of what that looks like and how it's different from the dominance paradigm. So before we get all the way into that, though, we have to understand this other thing, the threat response. So we all, as humans, and we share this with all the animals down to the reptiles, have a primitive threat response in our nervous system. It responds, if we perceive a threat, we are going to have a tension in our bodies that is pooling energy for only a few outcomes. It's like a computer program, and all you have available to you once you're fully immersed in that is fight, run, freeze. And if none of that is working for you, you will go into shutdown, what I call a merciful state, where who wants to be on high alert if you're about to be devoured alive by a mountain lion, right? So we have this shutdown, which is going numb and not caring, going into this less than present place. And then slightly higher in our nervous system with the more mammalian part of who we are, we have this other threat response, which is called placate, which I think, I mention this in particular because I think a lot of people are doing this with Trump right now. They are scared and threatened, and they try to placate him, and that is not empowerment. None of these are actually going to empower us in the realm of human interaction. So we need to know that. We need to know it's built into us. We need to know we're all vulnerable to sliding into the threat response, and we need to know that's not at all as good as we can do. So after a certain level of development, so it may be the best that small children can do, but after a certain level of development, these are never the best options for a grown adult who's in their full capacities. We have this fancy neocortex, which is really capable. It has complex thought and skill development, abstraction, symbolic thinking, and that is the place where our best empowerment is going to be. So we all have this challenge. When somebody says something really insulting and offensive to me, my threat response goes up, and maybe I want to call them a name, or maybe I want to put them down, or make them feel what I feel. But that is not empowerment. So we need to hang on to that, not judge ourselves or believe that we're bad. It's built into us, but we need to learn the skills of managing that and finding that healthier, more empowered response. The dominance power paradigm is an extension of the threat response to the social level. It focuses on the others as the problem, as we mentioned. It narrows our vision, just like in a threat response. If you were going to leave here and there was a mountain lion crouched and ready to pounce on you, you're going to be laser focused on that mountain lion. You're not going to be paying attention to everything else that's happening on Mass Street that might be fun and enjoyable. It's going to be all about the threat. So when we're in this mode, in this threat response, and then in the dominance paradigm, we're going to be so focused on threat, we can't see the whole complex situation. That can make us feel helpless, especially when every morning we wake up and there's a new blow, there's a new bad thing that happened, or national treasure Haskell is being, taken through the gauntlet to even survive. All those things are experienced as threats, and we're going to end up with a narrow vision and only focusing on, the people causing the problem if we don't pay attention. Also, the dominance paradigm, the tactics to control other people is to use fear, pain, shame to try to overpower the other person. It's happening really large scale right now. But if we participate in that, if we succumb and become, go into our threat response, our dominance paradigm, which we're fairly hardwired to do unless we change it intentionally, it doesn't change a thing except who's the top dog doing these dominance behaviors, right? So we can't change the process of the system in this model. We can't, it's not possible. The only available responses are to become top dog ourselves and become the thing we actually were against in the first place. So there's nothing for us there. There's nothing for us in the threat response. There's nothing for us in the dominance paradigm. So what do we do? That's when I first started studying all this, I'm like, oh my God, if there's no winning, what do we do? There's no way to win in this paradigm. We got to switch the paradigm. That's the answer. So in the true power paradigm, we're rehumanizing through basic human respect. Now that doesn't mean you endorse, it doesn't mean you have to admire, it doesn't mean anything except the recognition that this person, these people, are humans, and for that reason at least deserve some basic respect. So there are 4 levels of respect, skills you could say. The first one is just holding value for people. The second one is giving attention. We'll talk about how to use that in some of the work that we all do. A commitment to non-harm, and the highest level of respect is to nurture the well-being of another person. Hard one to get to if somebody's being really ugly with you, right? So that's the big challenge. I always say, my daughter's here, she hears me say it all the time, I'll be working on this till I'm 99. I'm guessing that all of you will too. It can be refined endlessly. But these are this is the goal. The true power paradigm also perceives distressing situations as a problem to solve or a challenge to rise to, not as a threat, a problem to solve or a tricky situation, but it requires analysis and skill, and mostly the skills we need are communication skills and self-management skills. We need to manage our own threat response to be able to be effective, and we need to have some good communication skills built up. We're not born with those. We're born with the threat response, but we're not born with these, so we have to make an effort to learn them. It also, as I mentioned before, it focuses on self, not the other. And the kinds of questions I would encourage you to ask yourself while doing that focus is, what matters most to me in this situation? Rather than fighting against Trump and Musk, this gets nuanced, so I don't mean this fully the way it may come off. What I want to fight for is Haskell's existence, right? When I'm fighting for Haskell, I have endless possibilities and all kinds of things to try to solve this problem. If I'm fighting against Musk, I don't have any power over Musk. Zero. I have no accountability process for Musk, unless I can get my representatives who might have some accountability force to do that. But personally, I don't, right? I can speak up to people who have more influence than I do. So what matters most to me in this situation? What is in my power to do? That serves what matters most. Not what do I need to get somebody else to do? What's in my power to do? And what skills and resources do I need to be able to do that thing that is in my power? How do I create more power to do more by building my own skills and knowledge, perhaps, and resources? So in the true power practices, we're fighting for what matters, not against someone or something. So you can feel that difference as you think about it, right? There's a difference when I'm fighting for something than against. Like, we will be drained and made helpless if all we're doing is fighting against. So one of the key features, if we have to focus on self and we're trying to figure out what matters to us, how do we know? How do we find that thing where that passion, that energy and motivation is? We need self-focus, we need self-awareness, and we need self-expression skills. I'm not going to dig real deep into that. I just want you to kind of have that as part of your roadmap. Here's a personal awareness path that can help you identify it even more. Like often we start, let's say, knowing what our emotions are, which is this blue one over here. I know I'm mad. Okay, when I'm angry like that, what am I thinking about? And then, even most importantly, and that's why it's in red here, not because red is the best color, blue really is, right? But it draws your eye. The longings, knowing what we feel tells us what we long for. So if I'm angry, what is it that I'm really wanting while I'm feeling angry? Maybe I want better understanding. Maybe I want to hold somebody accountable. Maybe I want mutual understanding. Maybe I want boundaries set. Those kinds of longings tell me where my actions need to go. We don't want to go down the primitive threat response where when I'm angry I want to hit something. That doesn't actually empower us. So this is another model. Again, I'm not going to dig too far into it today because we don't have the time, but it's a roadmap to try to figure out what matters most to you. When you're having big feelings, what are you thinking about? And what is it that you long for? Those two adjacent pieces are going to give you something. So, we take in information, I read the news, and I have some thoughts about it, and some of those thoughts make me angry or sad or feel helpless. Then I ask myself, and what do I long for when I'm feeling those things? And that longing is how I set my intentions, and how I set my intentions prepares me. That's where opportunity, we can be opportunistic, and once my intentions are set, when an opportunity comes up, then I can deliver more easily if I already know what my intentions are. And then my actions, those are the skills, that's the communication. We want to design those to match our intentions and our longings as much as possible. Does that make sense? So we're not building our best battle language, we're building the language that suits our longings and intentions and communicating about that. And effects is up there because it helps to notice the effect you actually have. Even our most artful, communication lands wrong, and if it lands wrong a lot, we're probably not doing the best we could, and we could refine that. Again, I'm doing I'm covering a lot of ground here that you may have a lot of questions about, but I'm wanting to give you the broad view. Actually, I'm going to skip over these next few slides because they just dig into that a little bit more, but they will be there on Terry's post on YouTube. So I want to give you an example. What does accountable self-expression look like? They're I statements. You've heard this probably many times from pretty much every communication workshop you've ever been to. You got to talk about yourself. So in the True Power Paradigm, accountability is about you. You are accounting for your experiences. And if we hold other people accountable, we're asking that of them. We're not saying, you effing idiot, what makes you think that? We're saying, can you help me understand how you got there? Something like that. So we might ask somebody about themselves as we're holding them accountable, but when we're being accountable, we're saying I statements, not you this, you that. This is what matters to me. This is how I experience this. And so this is an example, this sounds like counselor speak, you'll have to make it your own, but a formula could be, when I heard you say, whatever it was, to me that meant this, and when I think that, I feel, and I really long for this, and my intentions, so I'm going to, whatever. So one example, when I heard you say just now that you support Trump's policies, to me that means we have very different perspectives. It also means to me that you aren't standing up for things that I think matter a lot. And when I think that, I feel really confused and alarmed, maybe even a little scared. I really long for some understanding about where you stand and how you see things, what your priorities are. I long to have you consider what matters to me and why I don't support his policies. And so the intention is to invite you to a more open conversation to work for common understanding. So you're naming your intention. So I'm asking to talk with you about this in a real effort to understand each other. That's really long, so you can see how that you wouldn't normally have to say all these pieces in any given conversation, but it gives you some flavor. And again, make it your own. I know people don't use longings the way that I'm using them today. They often say want. But the reason I distinguish that is usually if I ask people what they want, they'll tell me what they want somebody else to do. And we want our longings. What do you long to see happen? This is the Gandhi thing, be the change you want to see in the world. What's the change you want to see, and be that. This is a version of that. So this takes practice, as you might imagine. This isn't something you're just going to pop up with, on the fly when your, cousin who, found your Facebook starts to, rail on you about your viewpoints. It's not going to be there. You have to take a minute to ask yourself what matters, what do I feel, what do I think about this? What's my intention here in this interaction? Sometimes it's not about having more of a conversation. Maybe it's a boundary. Maybe it's saying, I am not willing to participate in a conversation that has this much disrespect in it, and so I'm going to check out. We can set boundaries this way too. I want to always mention, beware the fake I statement. Saying, I think you're a jerk is not a real I statement. Everybody recognizes that. Okay, so again, there's so much more we could do with this, but we're going to keep talking. So just to try to boil it down a little bit, some of the communication messaging principles that come out of the true power paradigm is telling people about the impact. Like that's part of what Haskell has been doing, right? They're telling the impact on them. They're not generally saying, all of these people who support that are bad. They're saying this is what's happening to us and asking people to care about that. And some people will and some won't, but the empowerment comes from that connection and that communication, not telling other people what's wrong with them. I think it was Brooklyn, maybe last month, talked about this concept of calling in versus calling out. We want to ask people to care about what matters to us. We don't necessarily need to tell them how they're terrible for not already caring, right? We want to call people in as much as calling out. If it's genuine, we want to show genuine interest in what matters to others too. I forget that one all the time. I'm so invested in my message and wanting to make sure I get that out that I don't remember to ask what matters to other people. Once everybody is told what matters most, that's where conflict resolution can occur. If all of us are looking out for what matters most to all of us, we're going to get someplace brand new that we never could have gotten to by ourselves, even when we start off in really, really different places. I did mention before, but we will have to, some of the messaging is about setting boundaries, about pain and shame and fear behavior from others and making sure we're following this rule ourselves. You were talking about how, the way we speak about other people in our community, we want to be mindful and be willing to be held accountable and to be willing to hold other people accountable. We want to set those boundaries, not by shaming and blaming in a counterattack, but by asking, calling people to something different. So I wanted to give some examples. This presentation would probably look very different in a month or two, depending on what's going on, because there's always something going on. I don't know how to click on that link from here. Do you know how I do that? We should have practiced that earlier. So I picked out some videos of various politicians doing, fairly well, good enough, or, at least in the right direction, and nobody's perfect. As I said, I'll be working on this till I'm 99. So you'll hear examples that sometimes stray into that more dominance or threat response kind of thing, but let's see if we can get this.
It keeps coming up with some support page.
Oh, it's not playing yet. It's like an ad or something first?
It's also not coming up on me.
Oh, I don't know how to do that.
That's what it keeps coming up with.
Oh, I wonder if we can go back to the slide and copy
Paste.
and paste that link maybe?
Problem solved. There you go.
I had them queued up, so we'll have to see if this works, because I want you to see some examples. Oh, very good. Do we have sound?
I did not. I forgot about the.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have done more prep with you.
Sorry, twin, we were all ready to go.
I'm going to grab some paper towels and water.
Jerry include this link in his message to us?
Chair Murphy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask you, Mr. Lando, is President Trump a Russian asset?
Absolutely not, Senator. He's the President of the United States, duly elected by the American people.
Well, the reason I ask is many people back home have been asking me this
See
question.
how calm he is?
And they say, if he was an asset, we would see exactly what he's doing now. For example, he proceeded to forward or express from the Oval Office propaganda that has been Russian propaganda, that Ukraine started the war, that Zelensky is a dictator. Second of all, he gave away key things on the negotiating table before the
This is
negotiations even
accountable
started,
expression.
ensuring U.S. would absolutely oppose any possibility of NATO membership for Ukraine. Third, he's cut off the arms shipments to Ukraine, completely undermining their ability against a massive neighbor next door with short supply lines and huge resources. Fourth, he's undermined the partnership with Europe, which has been essential to security over the last 80 years, a major goal of Putin's. And then he's done everything to discredit and dismean Zelensky on the international stage with the just shameful press conference in which he teamed up with the vice president to attack Zelensky. I can't imagine that if he was a Russian asset, he could do anything more favorable than these 5 points. What else could a Russian asset actually possibly do that Trump hasn't yet done?
Senator, the President has made it absolutely clear that his top priority is to try to bring peace and end an absolutely savage war. I know you're familiar with the savagery. This is turning into World War I style trench warfare now in eastern Ukraine. The President is an exceptionally gifted deal maker. He is probably the only individual in the entire universe that could actually stop this. The President understands as part of his deal.
Well, let's turn to another.
That you have to have carrots and
Thank
sticks.
you very much. Since
Boundary
we're now on the
setting.
topic I was raising. Mr. Whitaker, these 5 things that the President has done that are so favorable to Putin and so damaging to Ukraine and to our partnership with Europe, do you approve of them?
Persistent
Senator,
accountability.
thanks for that question. I'm just going to have to politely disagree with you on those 5 things and the way you framed them. You know, the war in Ukraine would have never happened if President Trump was president in 2022. The war in Ukraine happened because of Joe Biden's weakness after
I
the
don't think
withdrawal
that was
from
the question I
Afghanistan.
asked, but maybe you could some other time go on television and express those points of view, but do you mind just answering the question I asked? Do you agree with the 5 things that President Trump has done, starting with him expressing Russian propaganda from the Oval Office?
Well, you know, again, as I mentioned to your colleague, I'm not here to assign labels. We're in the middle of a very important peace negotiation.
Okay, thank you. I do hope
Wait, can we go ahead
that
and
we
stop?
have an administration that
Go back to the presentation. So again, not perfect, but very good example of really persistently holding somebody accountable, not letting them define the terms of engagement, if you will, not yielding, you know, it's persistent. It took persistence and continuing to name, you know, he's being accountable by naming reality as he sees it. He's holding the other person accountable by saying, actually, no, I'm the one that gets to ask the questions and you're not answering my question, so I'm gonna keep asserting that. And everybody was calm. You notice the other, with all respect, he says, you know, no, so it kind of sets the stage for nobody else becoming really shamey, blamey. There was obviously some things none of us liked. I heard the reactions, our threat response came up, right? But I thought he did a really nice job of the kind of messaging and communication that is going to be empowering for us. That's just one example. So let's take a look at some other principles. I want to say it's really important to remember, partly because of this primitive threat response, when we engage in aggression after feeling threatened, it can feel gratifying. It's like the full, playing out of a program, and it feels gratifying, but that is not power. So, if I say something ugly back to my cousin on Facebook, that might feel good for about a split second. But what did it do? We don't understand each other. He's probably going to be completely on the other side of the spectrum even more, and maybe even be more activated by my aggressive response to be aggressive with me. I haven't achieved anything I would actually long for. So we need to remember that, and again, not shame ourselves. It's part of who we are in that primitive aspect of being human. But because it is reinforcing, it will happen unconsciously unless we have a practice. I call these practices because we have to work at them all the time. We don't have to work at the threat response, it's in us. But we do have to work at finding this other pathway and paving a new road. So that conscious intentionality really does matter a lot. Now, I've got 2 different videos. Quinn, if you can play the top one. This is with Zelensky in the White House.
Now I just want to watch C-SPAN with Barbara.
With my little side comments. And there they did this.
Yes, what's going on here?
Oh, yeah.
Stupid president, $350 billion.
Dominance paradigm, right?
Equipment. And your men are brave, but they had to use our military. If you didn't have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days. This is something new. In 2 weeks, of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this. I tell you.
Say thank you. Except that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on. I think it's very important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the cars. You're buried there. Your people are dying. You're running low on soldiers. Listen, you're running low on soldiers. It would be a damn good thing. Then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go and I want this. Look.
He's just doing dominance paradigm all over the place, Trump, right?
Stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you say you don't want a ceasefire.
I said to you,
I want a ceasefire.
with guarantees.
Because you get a ceasefire faster than an agreement.
Ask our people about ceasefire, what they think.
That wasn't
Doesn't
with
matter
me.
for you what
That wasn't with me. That was with a guy named Biden, who was not a smart person. That was with Obama.
It was your president.
Excuse me, that was with Obama, who gave you sheets, and I gave you javelins. And I gave you the javelins to take out all those tanks. Obama gave you sheets. In fact, the statement is.
Okay, let's go ahead and stop this. I won't subject you to it anymore, but that is such a clear example of somebody using dominant strategies. He's always been about that. Back in the 90s when I first started doing workshops like this, I would use him as an example. Little did I know he was going to get to this level. He's been like this forever. So, but notice Zelensky through all of that. He did not engage on the terms that Trump wanted, I believe, to create such a scene that he would be justified in saying, see, we should not be supporting Zelensky. We should do everything we can to remove all support. And of course, Zelensky didn't buy into it. He didn't behave as badly as Trump was, I think, trying to goad him into. He stayed kind of in his own space. Trump was nudging Zelensky and even kind of punched him on the arm at one point. If you watch the whole video, he kept using I statements. I know what matters. I know my country, and he just held his ground as best he could while being ganged up on. Because if he had done his dominance response, if he had done his threat response and behaved in a dominant way, what would have happened? The thing he cared about the most would have been harmed even more, right? So he had to keep his cool enough. He had to be strategic. He had to be really tapped into what mattered most and how to serve that in this very bizarre situation. So let's play the next clip right below that, because this is, I want you to notice in yourself what happens when you watch this version, because we...
I feel better.
This is the danger. That feels good to watch. But imagine if Zelensky had done it. So we need to all know this is in us, that we can actually enjoy this weird dominance game if we think we're winning it. Okay, we don't have to keep replaying it. I don't want to rehearse it. Linda said she could watch it all day. But get it out of your system, because that's not going to help us, right? So again, my main point is showing that is a little comedic relief, but also because this is in all of us to feel that kind of, oh yeah, that, you know, but it isn't power, it's not empowerment. Okay, how are we on time? A few more minutes, okay. So I guess I'm not going to play this one, but I want to talk about it. They're in a hearing, I'm going to forget which hearing it was. Sarah McBride was introduced as Mr. McBride. You all remember this? Or you saw it? And then McBride says back, "Thank you, Madam Chair," to a male-identified chair. And then Keating jumps in as another senator who takes on, who was, I'm forgetting the names now. The chair who misgendered Sarah McBride, the other, Keating took on that person. So Keating is the white male with all the privilege in the room, cisgender white male, and he takes on the chair instead of leaving it to McBride to simply handle it by herself or on her own, you know, unsupported. So I want to have this idea in our minds that those of us who carry privilege, you know, white privilege, male privilege, wealth privilege, all kinds of privilege, we have a role to play. We can't, it doesn't go away, you know, just because I don't want it, it doesn't go away. So how do we use it in the service of what we long for? And that is an example of it. Because otherwise, people who are in the more privileged positions are held less accountable. They're not asked to account for their behavior and its outcomes. Things are always aligned in favor of those who have the privilege. Access to things that aren't given to others. This connects with some of what you were talking about with, you know, people who are on the margins of our, you know, they're not mainstream privileged folks in our own community. We want to think about how to use our privilege. So we can use it to open doors, provide access, speak up for others, challenge norms, as was in that video. And then we want to pay attention. What happens when we do this? Things change. I want to add another concept in really quickly. So part of respect you might think of as who's in our circle of care, who do we feel connected to and responsible for and, you know, want to nurture their well-being. And I would argue that we get too narrow in that, or at least more narrow than our empowerment would be served by. And so the more we can expand our circle of care, whether, you know, as an individual, as a community, you know, as soon as we're actually looking at and paying attention to people who tend to end up on the margins, the better the whole community gets. They don't go away just because we're not paying attention. They're still having experiencing impacts and having an impact on the community that we really want to have. And so as soon as somebody is considered outside of my circle of care, they become other, again, because of this dominance paradigm. And so we want to counteract that and bring more people into our circle of care. And I got to thinking, how does that apply in terms of our Democratic Party in this county? You know, it's easy to go to rallies where it's all of you and you support what I say, and we tend to agree and pat each other on the back, which is all good. We need that too. But what happens if we start to expand to people who don't already agree with us and don't already feel some of the same things? And I happen to be lucky enough to serve on the Douglas County Sustainability Climate Action Plan Steering Committee. And I was very impressed with how the county staff handled these focus groups. Well, the fact that they had them in the first place. They went out county everywhere. They made it as accessible as possible, asking everybody in the county, what matters to you in terms of how we address and deal with climate stuff? What do you need from the county? How can we assist what matters to you? And there were folks who, everybody from, we've been on this land since Kansas ever became Kansas, and we don't need your help, and stay out of it, you're in our way. Kind of hostile, to the point the sheriff was at one meeting, but kept it, from being anything wasn't dangerous. So they listened to those folks too. And the plan we all came up with after listening to everybody was so much stronger than what we would have ever come up with if we hadn't done that. So I want to have us think about, how do we expand our circle of care even as Democrats in this county? Can we start with the people who didn't vote? Maybe that's an easier place to start. Can we get interested in what matters to them and how they don't see themselves in our plan? And then maybe one day even the Trumpers, right? We can maybe start to have conversations when our skills get really good and we're able to handle some of the hostility that maybe sometimes we get. So I want to have you be thinking about that circle of care idea and how to broaden where you bring respect for viewpoint, respect for different priorities in life that might not be yours. This is a video of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I'm saying we don't have to be perfect to get started. She is giving a speech in this, but we don't have time, I think. We can make sure they're in the YouTube, so you can find the links to these. She's giving a speech and describes, she's got all this energy and anger. So I like how she represents what to do with anger that isn't dominance paradigm. And she describes this very strategic action that she and some of her colleagues were able to make to show up in the Department of Labor to first remind the staffers what their legal obligations were to voters, and then also to take it to the courts so that the courts could empower the staffers to do what they needed. And it's not perfect, it's a little messy, but again, we don't have to be perfect to know it all before we start. So take a look at that video if you get a chance. I like this, it showed up on Facebook of all places, right? There are times when you must speak not because you're going to change the other person, but because if you don't speak, they have changed you. So sometimes the only empowerment we get is to stay whole. And that matters. You staying whole, you not becoming a lesser version of yourself as you try to protect from some of the onslaught that comes. We need you. We need you to stay as whole as possible. We need your humanity. We need your complex view of things. We tend to oversimplify so much. So even if this is all you get out of it, it's a win. Does that make sense? Okay, there's a lot of nods. Good. This is a much longer thing. It'll be on the, I don't need to, well, do we have a minute? Oh, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and read it. This is something I wrote up a while ago trying to help some other activists that I've worked with before. And anyway, this is what it says. This is a time, and this is my message to all of you too, this is a time for bulking up our emotional strength. We cannot bulk up without picking up the weight. We need times of meditative rest and calm too, but we really need right now that capacity for looking straight into the truth of things. We need to see clearly and bravely so that we can understand what needs to be done and then remain steady and do it. We can only do that with true emotional strength. We need to be able to feel our anger, because anger is a cue that something we care about is being violated and needs protection. That anger feels us to rise to advocate for what matters most. But anger is not the same as aggression. Anger is healthy and expressed in terms of setting boundaries and speaking up for what matters. Do not silence or numb your anger. Pick it up, carry its weight, and know its true power. We need your anger right now. We need to be able to feel our grief, because grief is about loss of something loved. When we feel grief, it fuels us to act with greater compassion, allowing us to nurture bonds that will be sustaining for all of us. Do not silence your grief. Pick it up, carry its weight, and know its true power. We need your grief right now. We need to feel and accept legitimate helplessness, because this allows us to focus on where we are not helpless. If we fail to accept legitimate helplessness, we continue to spend energy where we can have little effect. By allowing it, feeling it, we move through to more wisdom about where we can be effective. Do not numb your legitimate helplessness. Pick it up long enough to move through it. We don't need to hang on to that, but we need to move through it. We need that wisdom right now in your clarity. about where you can make a difference. We need to feel our reality-grounded fear, because such fear tells us where to laser focus our efforts. That fear makes us vigilant enough for the massive relearning. I didn't get on this point, but I think we've got a massive relearning that we're up against. The massive relearning required of us now. Please don't numb your reality-based fear. We don't have time to go into it, but there's a whole lot of fears that aren't. Pick it up, carry its weight, know its true power. We need your reality-based fear right now. This is a time for bulking up our emotional strength. We cannot bulk up without picking up the weight. Pick up as much as you can, and then rest a bit, and then pick it up again. Let your emotions guide you to understand what matters, and let your emotions energize you. We get energy from our emotional access. We need you. This is the army we need right now. We need people so emotionally strong that they can handle what is happening in full consciousness and with wisdom. We need people so emotionally strong they have the capacity to bond with others in a web of community. That web of community means the frail are no longer so vulnerable, the problems become solvable, and the difficulties can be managed. We need your emotional strength right now. Do not numb out, pick up the weight, carry it, and know its true power. There's a big gift on the other side of this work: integrity and wholeness, and the ability to co-create new terms of engagement that are not battle.
Does anyone have a quick question for Barbara? Yes, Suzanne?
Yes. In the 60s, there was a psychiatrist, Dr. Eric
Byrne?
Byrne said that what we do when we sit around and we ain't it off, all we do is the two of us walk away. And right now, we just have a nanosecond. We've got to stop the ain't it awful, because we are in an authoritarian state right now. And we have to get that fear that we have, we've got to change it to fire in our belly. We've got to compress this right now. We don't have any time. That's all I want to say.
I appreciate that. Yes. It's so easy to numb out, isn't it? But we don't have the time.
I think you've made some excellent points here, and I think we can all learn from it. One thing, though, I would point out, that debacle in the Oval Office press conference, which is deeply disturbing to me. One thing that is so obvious is that the person who is the president of our country right now is a bully, and bullies are cowards. And he would never have attempted that if he hadn't had J.D. Vance sitting there to back him up. That was a preset situation. And I think that Zelensky handled himself as well as anyone could. And I salute him for that. Yeah.
I'm just dreading, hoping that he wasn't going to take the bait, and he didn't. He didn't accept those terms of engagement.
Would we be able to share your slides? Is
Yes.
that something you would be okay with? Okay, because then we can click on the videos ourselves too. And
Yes.
Thanks, Barbara. This was really great today.